Alright team, we had a very successful year and we launched some amazing products. I could not be happier with the results. I mean, take a look at some of our achievements, right? Pro Series switches, one of the best dollar to performance ratio in the market. Cap switches, they don't suck anymore. Box inks, we took the crowd favorite ink blacks and we made it even better. We made it black pink. And who could forget the CJs? Really good call on the polished stems, Michael. That's why you make the big bucks around here. But this is Gateron. We're not JWK. We don't just recolor switches. This is true innovation, guys. Alright, I'm super excited about this one, guys. I'm not quite sure what to call it yet, but that, we'll leave it to the marketing guy, right? But this switch, it's going to be a true game changer. We took the lower housing from an ink black, we made it even more black. And then we took the nice polished stems from our CJ switch, we made that black, put it right in here. No, we don't use any tiny little spring in this switch. We took a 20mm Chad spring, we painted it black, shoved it right in. And this right here, this is our trick. We took the upper housing and we made a brand new mold. This thing is made of nylon, super tight, no wiggle, no film, nice dense sound. And then we put a little fillet in the back. What does that do? It allows north-facing PCBs to work with cherry profile keycaps. Dang! And our new lubing process? It actually works! You don't even have to lube the switch by hand anymore. Given all this, I was thinking something like maybe dark inks, hyper inks, maybe even like velvet inks. They seem pretty appropriate. Whoa, Scott. It's your job to do engineering stuff. It's my job to make awesome names. Dark inks? No. Well, Trey, you're right. What do you recommend? After looking at your presentation, I got all these great ideas. Right? The housing and the stems, they're just grease master. What? You said I had grease on the switch, right? But there's only one thing. There's so much more to this. Lube Lord. Rolls right off your tongue, doesn't it? Lube Lord. Lord of Lube. Trey, why are you so focused on lubing? Shh, I got it. Oil King.
I feel like perhaps that's how Gateron actually names their switches. Some dude throws out names and it sticks. I mean, China Joys, Oil Kings, Kangaroos, it's all over the place. But you know, despite the silly names, they are good in my book, because they're killing it with amazing switches. This trend really continues today with the Oil Kings. That's right, someone decided that was a cool name. But they actually put their money where their mouth is and delivered. The Oil King is a brand new linear switch that incorporates the best of pretty much all worlds. Let's break this down and take a look. First, this switch, it's all black, literally, the housings, the stem, even down to the spring, all black. They started by taking the ink black lower housing and just made it more opaque and more black. Looking at the mold marks, they seem to be of the exact same mold, same material. Then, the stem, they took it from the CJ. If you recall, the CJ is so exceptionally smooth because it's a polished stem. Also, take a look at this pole, the blunt end of the CJ, it's just black. Another thing that you see is that CJ has double cuts on the stem, which you could also see here as well with the Oil King stems. If you compare it to the ink black stem, the pole is different as well as the ink black just having one cut on the stem as well. Now for the upper housings. According to Gateron, the upper housing is made of nylon. However, they didn't just take it from the old Gat yellow. No. Take a look at this design. You can see the small rolled fillet on the back side. This is to ensure that cherry profile caps fit on north-facing configurations. Plus, this is odd, but I did also notice that the upper housing is actually 0.1mm thinner than the ink black upper housing, as you can see right here. But what does that mean? Well, it means that the switch has full 4mm travel, but the stem peaks out ever so slightly above the top housing, which further helps cherry keycaps to fit north-facing. Here's how it looks on the ink black as a reference. And finally, as mentioned before, this thing has a 20mm Chad spring. It's really big. Take a look versus the standard ink black spring as well as the gold CJ spring. It's supposedly 80 grams, but I don't think so. I can show you what I mean later. For those who want to see to believe, here's the interference test on the GMK white on black. Yup, it passes with flying colors. Now, before we go into the technicalities of this, let me mention one thing. This is the first switch that I could legitimately say you can use this stock absolutely no problem. In fact, just use this stock. The new lubing process puts the lube exactly where it needs to be, so check it out. And I feel like it's slightly thicker than standard oil and does a really good job. Here, check this out. This is stock switches straight out of the bag. Yeah, I couldn't believe how good it was straight stock. I'll show you what it sounds like compared to a lubed one later as well. So as usual, I want to show you how this new Oil King switch compares to various other familiar switches in the market. We will be putting it up against the venerable Ink V2, but this time the new mold V2. It's actually much better. Then the Cap V2 Gold, the CJs, Nylon Gat Ink KS3s, and finally the classic Cherry MX Black. But before we do that, a quick word from our sponsor. Keeps for All is a Los Angeles-based keyboard and keyboard components company that is in fact one of the first of its kind to be woman-owned. The keyboard and its owner is focused on creating easy access and low cost to high-value keyboards and catering to the enthusiasts and beginners alike in this unique market. As you can see from some of their in-house keyboard offerings like the Freebird 60 and the Freebird TKL, which I have done reviews on, they are dedicated to delivering great products at affordable prices and no compromises to quality. The site offers everything you need from keycaps to switches to accessories and many doggy themed desk mats and wares, and pretty much everything else in between. Plus, the approach they take to the serious keyboard market is fun and accessible. Who doesn't like a carrot switch made to look like an actual carrot, right? Now, Keeps for All is a new vendor of KBD Fans products for those of us in the US. They will work on carrying all of your favorite KBD Fans keyboards and components, and the list grows every day. The best is that you don't even have to pay international shipping. A lot of the products, the shipping is actually free. That's right. And one more thing. Now, Keeps for All also has a marketplace that allows sellers to send in products they want to sell and buyers to buy. This is a great and trusted platform that allows both sellers and buyers to transact safely and quickly. I am an affiliate, so remember to use code KEYBOARD and you get 5% off on every purchase from Keeps for All. Check them out in the description below. Alright, so first up, I wanted to mention how smooth the Oil Kings are. These are smooth out of the bag, and they only get better with more use as the oil starts to distribute. At break-in, the Oil King stock will rival a hand-lubed Gat Ink Pro Yellow, no problem. If hand-lubed with 205, then the polished stem will put it beyond even the new mold Ink Black V2. Yep. Not as quite as smooth as the CJ though. Next up is a stem wobble. I remember before I was doing a very subjective, this is pretty tight and this is pretty wobbly, etc. However, I wanted to be able to provide a more objective metric for you guys. So I decided to use a caliper now and measure the wobble instead. This way you can do a mathematical comparison to which switch is actually tighter and whatnot. So take a look. If you see here, in addition to the horizontal and vertical deflection, the hypotenuse is a total deflection you can feel from one corner to another. This is what I'm calling the diagonal movement. Out of these switches, you can see a clear differentiation between switches of the new molds versus the old. For example, a Legacy Gat Yellow KS3 will have up to 0.6mm of horizontal and vertical deflection, creating a total of 0.85mm of diagonal movement. Meanwhile, the best performer of this group is actually the new Ink Black V2s with the new mold, with a solid 0.4mm horizontal but an amazing 0.2mm vertical, so the diagonal deflection is only about 0.45mm. The Oil Kings actually tied with the CJs with a nice and tight feel and a diagonal deflection of 0.5mm. So you can see that between the best and the worst in this group, the worst has almost double the movement of the best. So I hope this is actually helpful. Next up is probably what you're waiting for, the sound test. So another new thing this time. Rather than just my subjective opinion of how deep a switch is, I decided to use a spectrum analyzer. This tells me the overall frequency. What is interesting is that a switch won't throw a single frequency of sound, rather it will be a spectrum. However, a pattern develops where you can see some dominant ranges showing up, showing how deep the housing collisions can be. The upper frequencies can be from the spring, leaf, and cheddar and whatnot. So I'll record and show you this info after the sound test as well. All of the sound tests are done on my Portico with an aluminum plate and also with ePBT double shot ABS keycaps. So based on that, here is what I saw. As you can see here, the switches show a range of lower frequencies and also higher frequencies. It was interesting that most switches actually don't throw much sound between 200Hz and 600Hz it seems. But most people are looking for that lower frequency housing collision, so going for that THOC. Given that, I have highlighted the dominant range for each switch as well. As you can see here, a lot of these switches are considered thocky and do put out a lot of very low frequency ranges. Out of these all, I would say that the inks and the ink variants, like the Oil Kings, do hit a consistently lower frequency, along with the Cap V2, which is also very low frequency range as well. I did see that the CJ, Nylon Gat Yellow, and Cherry MX Blacks slightly higher based on these numbers. But overall, they're all thocky switches and they all sound in the ballpark of each other. Backed by popular demand, here is the switch performance chart. It incorporates the objective tests I've shown before and also blends in my subjective opinion as well. So as usual, we'll be looking at 5 different criteria for the switch performance. It'll be stem wobble, switch smoothness, switch sound level, sound pitch or frequency, and finally, the cost. So first up is the switch stem wobble. As shown before in the stem deflection measurements, the winner of this group is actually the Ink Black with a new mold. It had a total diagonal deflection value of only about 0.45mm, and it actually places itself in the lead. Then comes the Oil King and the CJ, tied with a score of 0.5mm diagonal deflection. Next is a Cap V2 with a total diagonal deflection of 0.57mm, followed by the Cherry Hyperglide Black at 0.64mm. Out of all these switches, the oldest Gat Yellow KS3 has the most stem deflection at 0.85 diagonal. This is on par with what the old Ink Black V2s were prior to the mold update as well. Next is the smoothness of the switch. From my previous review of the CJ switches, I claimed those to be the smoothest switches I've tested. That claim still holds true. Next up is the Oil King switches, thanks to the polished CJ stem being used in this switch. Then I would say the Gateron Ink V2s come third, followed by a Cap V2, the Gateron KS3, and the scratchier sounding Cherry Hyperglide Blacks. Alright, moving on to sound. First sound criteria is the sound level. This is whether the switch is clacky loud or quiet. There is some confusion about clacky being associated with pitch, so I decided to really drop that and change the name or the label of this criteria. Out of this group, I would say that the Gateron KS3 yellows top out at the chart with a fairly loud sound, followed closely by the Cherry MX Blacks. Next up is the Cap V2s, followed by the new Oil Kings with a deep but definitely more prominent sound. I would say that it's slightly louder than the CJ's looped. Finally, by no surprise, the Gateron Ink Black V2s come in at the lowest end with the quietest sound here. Next sound criteria is the pitch. So this is a combination of the objective spectrum analysis as well as my own opinion. First off, none of these switches are actually high-pitched. The materials they use to make them are pretty deep and thocky. However, since this is relative to each other, there will be switches that are higher and ones that are also lower. Based on that, the Gateron KS3 would register the highest, followed by the Cherry MX Blacks. Then the CJs will be right in the middle of this pack. On the lower side, you'll have the new Oil Kings, and then the Ink Black V2s, and finally the Cap V2s. The Cap V2s are interesting because the spectrum actually showed that it hits really low lows and also hits some higher highs, but overall to the ear, the switch is perceived as pretty deep. And final and the most objective criteria is the price. At the time of the review, the most expensive switch of this group is the Ink Black V2s at 75 cents a piece. Next up is the Oil King at around 67 cents a piece, and then the CJ at around 65 cents a piece. The Cap V2 is right in the middle of this pack at 50 cents a piece for this gold version, and is followed closely by the Hyperglide MX Black at around 48 to 50 cents a piece. Finally, the value king here is the Gateron Yellow KS3 at around a quarter or 25 cents a piece. So I hope that the slew of tests and this chart really helps to put things into perspective in terms of the various different performance metrics and helps you make the best decision in terms of what you're looking for. Alright, with now everything out of the way, let's do the full typing test with the Oil Kings all lubed. As mentioned before, the Oil Kings are really good out of the box, but they do get slightly deeper and also slightly smoother with lubing, so I wanted to show how they are in its ultimate form. No film is necessary for any of these new Gateron molds because they're really tight to start with, so let's check it out. Just amazing sound from these switches. They really sound like more exciting ink blacks in my opinion. Speaking of ink blacks, remember when I said these have 80 gram bottom out springs? Nah, look at this. The ink black is rated at 70 gram bottom out and the Oil King actually bottoms up before. So I feel like the Oil King is really around 65 grams honestly. Alright, so what is my opinion of these new Oil Kings? Well, I can sum it up in one word. Fantastic. Honestly, Gateron has been killing it lately with their new switches and this one is no exception. The Oil King literally takes the best of the premium ink black and makes it slightly louder, slightly smoother, more compatible, and cheaper. The only thing that the ink blacks have on the Oil King is a tiny bit deeper sound on upstroke due to the upper ink material housing. But honestly, it's negligible and I would take the Oil King over the inks any day of the week, really. The Oil King is a premium ink black for everyone. The ones that don't want to loop. The ones that love the ink sound but need more volume. The ones that use north-facing PCB with cherry caps. Maybe this should actually have been called the Ink King, because it's like the ink, but in my opinion, better. The CGs were my favorite linears last year. They are still my favorite, but is now joined by the Oil King side by side on the throne. Welcome the new king next to the queen. Thanks.